overcompliance regarding Venezuela and how does affect the Venezuelan economy overall. Well, today we discuss.
Welcome to Venezuela Insider, the only place in Venezuela for expats, digital nomads, entrepreneurs, investors, travelers, and related internationals. For more information, venezuelainsider.com.
One of the debates on the Venezuela's economic world is how responsible are the sanctions of the Venezuelan economic collapse, the 80% GDP collapse that I always talk about, and if the sanctions are responsible for such collapse. Before I start, I have to remind you that this video was recorded just previously the Venezuelan presidential election. So after the result, we might have a different analysis and the situation, the status quo, might change for the Venezuelan economy in the next few days, few months, and even years. Well, the answer is that the sanctions did not cause the collapse, the 80% GDP collapse. However, such sanctions are hindering further economic growth within Venezuela. First, let's discuss the time frame of the Venezuelan 80% GDP collapse. It started on 2013. Back then, Venezuela had the size of the GDP was hovering close to 400 billion US dollars. And of course, that was thanks mostly to the prices of crude oil. Remember, the Venezuelan economy is mostly tied to the oil economy. Around 90% of the GDP is tied some way or another with the performance of the Venezuelan economy, the Venezuelan oil economy overall. Very good on that. Now, back then, between 2011 and until early 2015, the prices of crude oil worldwide were sky high, talking over $100 per barrel of crude oil, the price that was the international price. So many oil economies back then were thriving, mostly the OPEC plus nations, Russia, but at the same token, that created the incentives for the shale industry in the United States to thrive, and also that caused later oversupply that collapsed the price of crude oil. So back then, Venezuela also was producing around 3 million barrels of crude oil per day and exporting 2+ million barrels of crude oil per day. Very good on that. And actually, over 1 million of such production was exported to the United States. Now, back then, the Venezuelan economy, yet again, tied to the oil industry. However, back then, we had over a decade of the presidency of Hugo Chavez that he passed away on 2013, allegedly. Not gonna get into the details, but Chavez was a quote-unquote socialist flirting with communism. And we know that he was very harsh against the private industries in Venezuela. Now, most of the oil industry is the government sector. It has been historically, by the way, but also with joint ventures with international, multinational oil companies, both from the US, Europe, and recently from Russia, China, and India and Iran. Those are the big players. Okay. Now, back then, talking, the rest of the economy, the Main Street economy, the average, the average Joe economy, the private businesses, of course, those businesses were dominated by, of course, private actors, private players. So Hugo Chavez was very harsh against such players, both domestic companies and also international companies. Also, we have to remember that Hugo Chavez was a coup against his presidency on 2022, first on April, and actually he was overthrown for just a couple of days, and also another attempt on late 2002, and this time was by the oil workers from the state-owned company PDVSA. Back then, Venezuela still has a bunch of high-skilled people and talent regarding the oil industry, And back then, they used to work in PDVSA and some other companies. Still, right now, they work on international companies, and PDVSA still has some sort of that. However, the la creme of la creme regarding the Venezuelan oil talent was on PDVSA on those days. And after the coup, and also it was a strike of these such workers if Hugo Chavez did not leave the presidency. So Hugo Chavez just fired everyone, the big guys on PDVSA back then, and those guys were replaced for people that was way less skillful but more loyal to the ruling party back then, of course, commanded by Hugo Chavez. So that was one of the main explanations why the Venezuelan economy started collapsing, but way later. Then on the mid-2000s, this particular gentleman, Rafael Ramirez, was appointed by Hugo Chavez as the president of PDVSA. Basically, he was the czar of the Venezuelan economy, the oil economy. But this particular man, he was very inept. He was a corrupt. Actually, he, allegedly, some estimations put his net worth over 10 billion US dollars, so he will be one of the richest men in the world, thanks to all of the corruption that he was involved during his tenure in PDVSA from 2006 to 2014. Right now, exiled in Italy. So, yet again, we go back to 2013 when the 80% GDP collapse happened. Back then, the oil prices were high, but in Venezuela, the private sector was very hindered. And also, we have to add the terrible policies that the Venezuelan government had back then: capital controls, currency controls, price controls, and so on. So basically, communist, socialist policies that we had back then. So that combined with then the collapse of the oil production and then the oil prices. That particular collapse of the prices started on early 2015. Very good. So basically all of this scenery, and then the death of the President Chavez and replaced by Nicolas Maduro, right now the current president. Remember, this video is being recorded just before the election, so we don't know. Legally, he should be in power until late of this year, by the way. But still, when Maduro came, what happened is that Maduro was seen, like a lackluster president. Still is seen by many people as a lackluster president. So basically, everything combined, the social turmoil, then we have social turmoil on 2014, protests against Nicolas Maduro because he wasn't popular, still is not very popular. Well, anyway, everything combined with terrible economic policies, the situation of the Venezuelan oil industry, and also the prices of crude oil worldwide. Everything combined, so basically it was quicksand for the Venezuelan economy. So everything happened very, very quickly. And also, back then, on the first term of Nicolas Maduro, he did not want to pivot the socialist communist policies that created this mess on the first place. And basically, everything happened very quickly, this collapse, the 80% GDP collapse, until 2017. When on 2017, we had another social turmoil scenario that was very bad, that attracted a lot of international attention. Maduro and his people they earned a terrible reputation worldwide, especially for international investors. Now, on 2018, Maduro actually makes 180, but a very discreet and silent 180. He never advertised it. He still hasn't advertised it, but he started taking more of a neoliberal approach to the economy. He lifted price controls, capital controls, currency exchange controls, price controls, all of that good stuff. Actually, the information, the intel that I got back then on 2018 is that people from the government were calling the private players, private investors, domestic businessmen here in the country and investors, saying, you know what, let's start over again. I promise I will change, something like that, kind of like love bombing, if I may, love bombing private businessmen. And some of them actually took the call and started, redoing their businesses, reinvesting, doing, having more of a bullish position in the country. That actually happened. And afterwards, since I will say mids of 2018, we saw the sentiment here on the business side of the equation, not on the average people. You saw the sentiment change. And by 2019 is when we had the de facto dollarization within the Venezuelan economy. So the collapse until 2018, actually, on real terms, we start seeing growth since late 2018, early 2019. However, this manifested on GDP growth since 2021 because, of course, we had COVID on 2020 and that hinders this particular trend a little bit. But since 2021, actually, Venezuela has sustained GDP growth year over year. And a couple of those years, it was a 2-digit GDP growth rate. Now, what happened with the sanctions? Well, let's start that most of the sanctions are against individual members of the Venezuelan government. It started with the turmoil on 2014. Back then, the US and the European Union and some other Western nations were concerned, for whatever that was, regarding the situation in Venezuela. And in the United States, one of the biggest proposals of sanctions against the Venezuelan government was the Florida Senator Marco Rubio. And Marco Rubio, actually, he was very involved during he followed closely situation in Venezuela. And on 2015, he, convinced the Congress, the Senate, and the House, even the President Obama himself, that was the Obama's administration, everyone just signed on putting sanctions on different individuals on the Venezuelan government. The first list was 55 individuals and a few other generals, military, and also fiscals and prosecutors of the Venezuelan government, but not yet the president himself, Nicolas Maduro. So between 2015 and until 2018, more names were added to this particular list. It went from 55 to over 200 people. A few of those names were actually people on the quote-unquote Venezuelan opposition. So, funny thing though, people like the current General Attorney of Venezuela, Tarek William Saab, also the late president of the CNE, the National Election Organism that we have in the country, Tibisay Lucena, and several other big-time politicians of the Venezuelan government. Remember, on 2017, we had the first Trump administration, and he still added more people to this particular list of, sanctioned Venezuelan individuals. Then, on 2018, things escalated way more because the U.S. Justice Department just not only sanctioned, but accused of criminal activity to several top-ranked elements of the Venezuelan government. Now, all of those sanctions until 2018 were against Venezuelan individuals. However, in practice, what happened is a process of overcompliance of multinational companies against Venezuelan private individuals, especially average citizens. The sanctions, of course, in theory, supposed to affect these particular powerful people on the circles in Venezuelan politics, but de facto, these people are rich. I mean, they have resources, so they can maneuver those sanctions. Maybe they cannot visit the United States, and even some other countries like the European Union, Switzerland, Canada, join on a lesser degree, but the most important ones were the United States because the SWIFT system, the SWIFT banking system is tied to the United States, and also many international business processes. Now, the average afterwards, after those individual sanctions against individual Venezuelan citizens, most of them part of the Venezuelan government, that created a lot of difficulties for an average Venezuelan in order to open an account abroad, make businesses abroad, get a remote job abroad, get suppliers, and so on and so on and so on. So that creates additional fractions for the Venezuelan economy thanks to those individual sanctions. And that's one of the reasons why the individual sanctions against individual members of the Venezuelan government affects the Venezuelan economy. Now, the biggest sanction came on early 2019, yet again under the first term of President Trump. He signed a veto sanction against the Venezuelan oil industry and the Venezuelan government in order to do business with multinational companies abroad. First, he stopped buying Venezuelan oil, and also he limited the operations and businesses that many multinationals, including companies outside of the United States, in order to do business in Venezuela. So that created a nightmare of overcompliance for the rest of the world in order to do business with Venezuela. Now, yet again, we go back to late 2022. Right? Joe Biden is on the White House, and also that happens the same year, several months after the special military operation in Ukraine by the Russian Federation. And of course, that created a lot of turmoil on the worldwide energy prices, especially crude oil. So one of the alternatives that the White House saw back then, it was to open up the economy for Venezuela in order to Venezuela become, yet again, a reliable oil producer and oil provider. So basically what they did is sign a waiver for several companies, including Chevron, the big U.S. oil multinational, in order to keep doing business in Venezuela, and several other companies joined as well. Now, the issue is that this particular waiver of sanctions was tied to some performance of the Venezuelan government that happens, it's very arguably. So until April 2024, the sanction waivers are going to be revised if the Venezuelan government is having some sort of, performance regarding, democracy and human rights and that kind of thing. Now, the issue was that, the U.S. was not pleased with the political performance of the Venezuelan government, so they reimposed some sanctions again, but it was more of a slap on the wrist. Still, many international multinational companies still can do business in Venezuela. This is only affecting oil industry and other strategic industries within the country, but still we have, yet again, the overcompliance. Now, what ended up happening is that the only quote-unquote sanction that Venezuela has is not doing business with the Venezuelan government when the Venezuelan government has over 50% of stake on joint ventures regarding oil industry and other strategic industries like mining. Now, the question is that the sanctions created the crisis in Venezuela, and the answer is no. So the collapse of the Venezuelan GDP was thanks to, first, the situation with the oil industry, but mostly is thanks to lackluster policies from the Venezuelan government. First with Hugo Chavez, and then with Nicolas Maduro. Then Maduro, on 2018, he did 180 on several economic policies, not political policies. In politics, he is the same, but in economics, has created like a silent capitalism, something of that nature, if I may. Well, however, further economic growth, and the Venezuelan economy has been growing, on theory since 2021, but I will say de facto since 2019, and we have COVID, of course. However, the sanctions are hindering further economic growth. Let's say, right now I'm recording this video and Nicolas Maduro is still the president. If that continues, what is poised to happen is the Venezuelan economy cannot go back down because it was mostly thanks to self-inflicted wounds. However, the rate and the duration of the further economic growth is going to be hindered for the sanctions, and also if Maduro is still the president of Venezuela, because he has a terrible image for international investors abroad. And also you have to consider the overcompliance that many multinational companies worldwide, suppliers, employers, financial institutions have regarding the sanctions against Venezuela. So that will be a key issue, the overcompliance of multinational companies against the Venezuelan private average individuals like myself.
Thank you for watching Venezuela Insider. Please like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on social media. If you want to work with us, VenezuelaInsider.com. Thanks again, and have a nice day.